Zuri sat stiffly in the living room, surrounded by her family. The walls, adorned with the expensive photographs of her late father and mother, now seemed to close in on her. Mama Olumide's voice was stern, cutting through the room like a blade. "You must understand, Zuri. This is not about you. This is about our family. You have a responsibility to us. Do not let your selfishness destroy everything we've worked for." Zuri's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't say a word. Her hands, clasped tightly in her lap, were clammy. She could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on her, as if every glance from her uncles and aunts were a reminder that this marriage was already set in stone. She had been resisting for weeks, quietly rejecting every attempt they made to convince her. But now, as Mama Olumide's voice rose, Zuri's resolve faltered. She wanted to scream, to break free, but the thought of losing everything, the comfort and the security, her father's legacy, made her stomach churn. She was trapped, and deep down, she knew it. The thought of disappointing her family, of betraying them, crushed her. But she wasn't sure if she could bear the thought of living a life that wasn't hers, a life where she was simply a pawn in a game that no one had asked her to play. Her uncle, Uncle Ife, leaned in, his face serious. "Zuri, think about this carefully," he began, his voice low and cold. "If you walk away from this marriage, you will lose everything. Your father's wealth, the business, the house, all of it. Your life will change overnight, and not in a way that will make you happy." Zuri stared at him, feeling as if the ground beneath her was crumbling. Her heart was racing as his words echoed in her ears. This wasn't just about a wedding. It was about her future, her freedom. Her mind screamed for escape, but her body was frozen. She glanced at her mother, whose face was hard as stone. Mama Olumide had never been one to show affection, but today she seemed colder than ever. Her eyes narrowed, as if daring Zuri to question her. "But why?" Zuri finally managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper. "Why can't I have a choice?" Uncle Ife shook his head slowly, a sigh escaping his lips. "Because, my dear, you do not have a choice. Not anymore. This is how things work. This is for the good of the family. I'm giving you a way out. Marry the man, and we will all move on. Defy us, and you will be alone. Your life will be ruined." Zuri felt the weight of his words, like a chain, wrapping around her chest, squeezing the breath out of her. She wanted to fight back, to tell him she didn't need their money, that she could make her own way in the world. But the truth was, she couldn't. Not like this. Not without their support. Olumide stood in front of her, smiling softly. His tall, broad frame seemed to fill the room, his expensive suit fitting him perfectly. Zuri forced herself to meet his gaze, but there was no warmth in his eyes, only a polite curiosity. He had been kind to her during their brief meetings, never demanding, never harsh, but kindness alone wasn't enough to make her heart race, to make her feel anything other than indifference. "I'm glad we could finally meet, Zuri," Olumide said, his deep voice calm and measured. "Your family speaks very highly of you. I can see why." Zuri swallowed hard, trying to muster a smile. "It's nice to meet you too, Olumide." But it wasn't nice. It wasn't even close. She felt trapped, like an animal in a cage, forced to look at something it couldn't escape. She had spent years building her career, her independence, and now it all seemed like nothing. Her dream of becoming a successful architect felt like a distant memory, lost in the flood of family expectations. Olumide was a stranger to her, someone she had never chosen. Yet, here he was, standing in front of her, and she was supposed to say yes. He reached out and gently touched her hand, and for a moment, she felt nothing but the coldness of the ring he wore. Zuri lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling in the dark. Her mind raced, the events of the day replaying over and over again in her thoughts. The arguments with her family, the pressure, the crushing feeling of being unable to breathe. She could hear her mother's voice, cold and sharp, telling her that this was her duty, her responsibility. But Zuri wasn't sure anymore what was real. Was she really being selfish, as they claimed? Or was she simply trying to reclaim the life that was hers? The photograph of her father on the bedside table caught her eye. His smile, frozen in time, seemed to offer silent support. He had been a man of great ambition, someone who believed in his daughter's strength. Had he known, in the depths of his heart, that this day would come? Zuri closed her eyes, tears escaping, as she whispered, "Papa, I need you now more than ever." She thought of running away, of leaving it all behind. But where would she go? Who would she be without her family's support? The truth was, Zuri didn't know if she had the strength to fight anymore. She was exhausted, emotionally and physically drained. But a part of her, the small, stubborn part, refused to let go of the dream of a life that was truly her own. The morning of the wedding arrived far too soon for Zuri. The sun was barely rising as the bustling sounds of the house began to fill the air. She could hear Mama Olumide's voice, giving instructions to the caterers and decorators. The house was a whirlwind of activity, yet Zuri felt detached, like she was floating outside her own body, watching it all unfold without any control. Her maid, Titi, entered the room and began placing the wedding gown on the bed. Zuri's breath hitched in her chest. The dress was beautiful, an ivory masterpiece, adorned with intricate beadwork, fit for a queen. But to Zuri, it felt more like a shroud. "You look stunning, Auntie Zuri," Titi said, with a beaming smile. But Zuri could only manage a tight-lipped smile in return. Zuri stood in front of the mirror, staring at the reflection before her. The soft lace of the gown against her skin felt foreign, like a costume she hadn't chosen to wear. She tried to steady her breath, but her hands trembled as she reached for the veil on the vanity. The weight of the moment was unbearable. As she adjusted the veil, she caught her reflection again. A bride, but not a woman who felt like she had made this decision on her own. She could feel the presence of her family just outside the door, their expectations pressing down on her shoulders. She had promised herself she would never allow anyone to dictate her life. But today, it seemed like she had no choice. The sounds of music, laughter, and chatter filled the large reception hall. The air was thick with the scent of rich perfumes and expensive flowers. Zuri stood in the center of it all, a smile plastered on her face as guests came forward to congratulate her. Their words were like a blur, lost in the space between her thoughts. "Congratulations, Zuri. You look breathtaking," Aunt Ngozi said, pulling her into a tight embrace. Zuri forced herself to smile and thank her, but all she could think about was how it felt like she was suffocating. The crowd, once familiar and comforting, now felt like a sea of strangers. Across the room, she spotted Olumide, talking to her uncle, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. He looked like a man playing a part, just as she was. He wasn't angry with her, no, That wasn't it. But there was a quiet resignation in his gaze. Zuri's heart wrenched. He hadn't asked for this either. They were both victims of circumstances, of families who thought they knew what was best for them. As the music played louder and the guests grew more animated, Zuri found herself withdrawing even further. She wanted to scream, to escape, but she couldn't. This was it. This was the life she was being forced into. She gripped the edge of her glass, the cold surface grounding her for a moment, as if she could somehow will herself into accepting this new reality. Excusing herself from the crowd, Zuri slipped into a quiet corner of the hall, away from the prying eyes of her relatives. She closed her eyes, pressing her palms together as she whispered a prayer. It was a simple prayer, one she hadn't said in years, but today it felt like the only thing she could do to regain a sense of control. God, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to go through with this, but please, show me a sign. Give me the strength to make the right choice. I'm so lost. Help me find my way. Her voice trembled as she spoke, her words barely audible over the distant sound of the music. She didn't know if she believed in the prayer anymore, but she needed to feel something, anything, that would give her a reason to stand tall. For a brief moment, there was silence in the room, as if the entire world had paused. Zuri opened her eyes, and for the first time that day, she felt a glimmer of peace. Maybe it was just the stillness of the moment, or maybe it was something deeper. But she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't keep living this way. She had to find a way out. Before she could gather her thoughts, Mama Olumide found her, her stern face breaking into a smile. Zuri, you look like you've seen a ghost. What's wrong, my daughter? Zuri stood up quickly, wiping her face as she tried to compose herself. Mama Olumide was a towering figure in her life, and no matter how much Zuri had tried to distance herself, her mother's influence was always there. The pressure to live up to her mother's expectations was crushing. We've all sacrificed so much for this wedding, Zuri. Mama Olumide continued, her voice soft but firm. You're the one who wanted to make something of yourself, remember? This is how it all comes together. You'll see. Olumide is a good man. He'll take care of you. We're doing what's best for you. Zuri nodded silently, the guilt of disappointing her family clawing at her insides. She didn't want to hurt them, but how could she go through with something that wasn't her choice? How could she give herself to a man she didn't love? All for the sake of family expectations. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, but Zuri couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how much she complied, she would always be empty inside. Zuri's legs felt like jelly as she made her way down the aisle. The soft music played, each note echoing in her mind like a drumbeat of impending doom. She had imagined this moment countless times as a child, but never like this. Never with such a heavy heart. The eyes of every guest were fixed on her, their smiles wide, their whispers barely audible. But it was all too much. Each step she took felt like a betrayal to herself. She felt trapped in the golden cage her family had built for her, a cage she hadn't asked to be placed in. As she neared the altar, she saw Olumide waiting, his eyes calm but unreadable. He was a stranger, yet, in that moment, she felt as though she had known him forever. Was this what it was meant to feel like? Was this what love felt like? Empty, detached, and unchosen. Zuri's breath hitched as she reached the front, her mother's proud smile, her uncles approving nods. They all looked at her as if this was the moment she had been waiting for. But Zuri couldn't share in their joy. She was a woman on the verge of losing everything she had ever dreamed of, all for the sake of tradition and family loyalty. As Olumide's voice rang out clear and steady, Zuri's mind struggled to focus on his words. I, Olumide, take you, Zuri, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, for better or worse. His words drifted around her, each one slipping past her consciousness without leaving a trace. She stood there, her hand resting lightly in his, and as he spoke, she felt the weight of her own silence. Her mother's gaze, sharp and unwavering, never left her face. Zuri could almost hear the expectations vibrating in the air. The truth was, she couldn't imagine a future with Olumide, not one that she would choose. It wasn't that he was a bad person. No, Olumide was kind, well-mannered, and had done nothing wrong. But Zuri didn't want to spend the rest of her life with someone who wasn't the person she longed to build a life with. Her mind wandered back to her childhood dreams. Dreams of studying abroad, of working on architectural designs that would shape cities. How had she ended up here, in this cold, oppressive room, with the decision of her life hanging in the balance? And yet, as Olumide looked at her, waiting for her response, Zuri felt trapped between the life she wanted and the life that was being thrust upon her. She took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. What was she supposed to say? She couldn't disappoint her family. Not now. Not here. The priest's voice boomed through the room, his words reverberating in Zuri's chest. Zuri, do you take Olumide to be your lawfully wedded husband? Zuri's world seemed to slow as she stood there, frozen in place. Her thoughts spun wildly, colliding with the sound of her mother's distant encouragement and her father's silent, unwavering gaze from the portrait on the wall. Was this what he had wanted for her? Say, I do, Zuri. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, sharp and commanding, as though her very approval depended on it. But the words lodged themselves in Zuri's throat, thick and suffocating. Could she say them? Could she say the words that would change everything? That would tie her to a man she barely knew? That would seal her fate? For a brief, fleeting moment, Zuri thought about running, about standing up and shouting that she wouldn't go through with it. But the cold eyes of her family were too much, and the consequences of defying them were too grave. Zuri swallowed hard, the dry lump in her throat making it nearly impossible to speak. I do, she said, her voice barely audible, but it was enough. The moment she said the words, she felt a strange sense of finality. There was no turning back now. As Olumide slid the wedding band onto her finger, Zuri felt its weight, not just physically, but emotionally. The simple gold band, shining under the bright lights, felt heavier than any burden she had ever carried. It was a symbol of everything she had just sacrificed. The room around her seemed to blur as the priest announced them as husband and wife. Zuri didn't hear the applause or see the smiles of the guests. She barely registered Olumide's hand, now holding hers firmly as they walked down the aisle together. Her heart felt hollow, her steps mechanical. This was the life her family had chosen for her, and now she was bound to it forever. She had hoped for just a moment that something might change. Some glimmer of hope would appear to let her escape, but it didn't come. Olumide's smile, his warm embrace, felt foreign. It was as though she were living someone else's life, someone else's dream. Zuri's thoughts raced as they walked together toward the reception. her hand still clutched tightly in his. What now? What did the future hold for her now? Was it too late to take it all back? The reception hall was filled with music, laughter, and conversation. The clinking of glasses, the sound of dishes being served, and the gentle hum of voices made it all seem so ordinary, as if nothing was wrong. But Zuri felt like an outsider in her own life. She sat at the head table, beside Olumide, but all she could think of was how she had allowed herself to be led here, like a lamb to slaughter. The soft buzz of conversation around her was a distant hum, her senses clouded by the storm raging inside her. Olumide tried to engage her in small talk, but she could barely respond. Her mind was elsewhere, caught in a whirlwind of self-doubt and regret. What had she done? What had she given up? Her dreams of independence, of carving her own path, had they all been for nothing? Her aunt, Auntie Ngozi, approached with a beaming smile and congratulated them. Such a beautiful couple, Zuri. You've made the right choice. Olumide is a good man, and he'll take care of you. But all Zuri could hear was the hollow ring of the words. The right choice. Was it really the right choice? Or was it the only choice? A tight knot of frustration tightened in her chest as she excused herself from the table, her feet carrying her away from the noise and into a quieter corner of the hall. She couldn't breathe. Zuri stepped out onto the balcony, the cool evening air brushing against her skin as she leaned on the railing, staring out at the city lights below. She closed her eyes, trying to collect her thoughts, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stop the thoughts from swirling in her mind. Her life had changed in an instant. She had been swept into this world of expectation, of family pressure, of promises made without her consent. She had given up her future for a life she didn't want. And now, standing here, alone with her thoughts, she wondered if she would ever find peace with the decision she had made. Could she ever forgive herself for not fighting harder? Could she ever reconcile the life she dreamed of with the life that had been handed to her? Zuri, a voice called softly behind her. She turned to find Duro, her cousin, standing in the doorway. His face was concerned, but there was something else in his eyes. Are you okay? You've been quiet all evening. Zuri didn't know how to respond. How could she explain the storm inside her heart, the feeling of being lost in a world she had no part in creating? How could she tell him that, despite the beautiful ceremony and the smiles of her family, she felt nothing but emptiness? Duro stepped closer, his voice softer now. Zuri, I know you're not happy. I can see it. But you have to understand something. You have a responsibility to this family. We've worked so hard to get here, and this is what's best for you. You can't just throw it all away. Zuri's chest tightened, the words cutting deep. She loved her family, but did that mean she had to lose herself in the process? Was it really fair for her to give up everything she had worked for, everything she had dreamed of, just to appease their expectations? But what about me, Duro? Zuri's voice cracked, the tears threatening to spill. What about my life, my dreams? I don't want this. I don't want him. I want to be free. I want to make my own choices. Duro's expression softened, but there was a sadness in his eyes. I know, Zuri, but this isn't just about you. It's about the whole family. We've all sacrificed, and you need to be strong for us. For all of us. Zuri looked away, unable to meet his gaze. She felt as though her very soul was being torn in two. On one side, the love and loyalty she had for her family, and on the other, the deep ache of knowing she had lost herself in the process. Olumide appeared at her side, his presence calm and reassuring. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, his touch warmer against the chill of the evening air. Zuri turned to face him, her heart heavy with the weight of the moment. "You've been so quiet," Olumide said softly. "Are you okay?" Zuri nodded, forcing a smile. "I'm fine. Just a bit tired, I guess." Olumide smiled back, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of understanding. He too seemed to sense the tension between them, the unspoken words that hung in the air like a heavy cloud. He didn't push her. Instead, he simply stood by her side, offering his silent support. Zuri felt a pang of guilt. He wasn't the enemy in this situation. He was just as much a victim of this arranged marriage as she was. But still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Something vital. Something that made her feel truly alive. The days following the wedding felt like a blur. Zuri went through the motions, smiling and nodding, attending family gatherings and outings, but she felt like an actress playing a part. She'd spent years building a life on her own, a life that was now slipping through her fingers. At night, she lay in bed next to Olumide, but it felt more like a distant acquaintance than a partner. She could feel his warmth, but there was no connection between them, no spark. It was as if they were strangers living in the same house, bound by a contract they didn't choose. One evening, as Zuri sat in the living room, her mother entered with a small package in her hand. "Zuri, this is from your father's collection. I thought you might like to keep it in the house now that you're married." It was an old, leather-bound book, a family heirloom that Zuri had once loved. Her heart sank as she took it from her mother, feeling the weight of everything she had lost. "I don't need this," Zuri said, quietly, staring down at the book. "I don't need any of this. It's not what I want." Her mother's face hardened. "You should be grateful, Zuri. This is your life now. You've made your choice, and there's no going back. We've all sacrificed for this moment." Zuri stood up abruptly, the weight of her mother's words suffocating her. She couldn't stay in this house any longer. She needed to find herself again, even if it meant leaving it all behind. She couldn't keep pretending. The tears were already streaming down her face as she turned toward the door. The night was quiet as Zuri slipped out of the house, the cool breeze brushing against her skin. She didn't know where she was going, but she couldn't stay here any longer. She needed to escape, to breathe, to remember who she was before she became someone else's idea of what she should be. Her feet carried her through the empty streets of Lagos, the city she had once loved, the city that now felt like a cage. Zuri thought of her dreams, the ones she had put aside for her family's approval, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of clarity. She needed to rebuild, to reclaim her life and her dreams. She couldn't continue to be the woman everyone else wanted her to be. She had to live for herself, not for anyone else. Zuri didn't know how she was going to do it, but she knew one thing for certain. This marriage, this life, wasn't it. She couldn't lose herself completely. Zuri stood at the edge of the family home, her heart racing as she dialed Olumide's number. She had been avoiding him for days, trying to figure out what to say, but now she had to face him. When he answered, his voice was calm, but she could hear the tension in his words. "Zuri, where are you? I've been looking everywhere for you." Zuri swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. "I can't do this anymore, Olumide. I can't live a lie. I can't keep pretending that I'm okay when I'm not. This wasn't my choice." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When he spoke again, his voice was soft, almost regretful. "Zuri, I never wanted this for you. I thought this would be the right thing to do. Marrying you, making our families happy. But if you're not happy, I won't force you. You deserve to be free." Zuri's heart ached at his words. She had wanted to hear that for so long, but now that she did, it only made her feel more confused. She had known from the beginning that this marriage wasn't right, but it took this moment, this raw honesty, for her to finally admit it to herself. "I'm leaving, Olumide. I don't know where I'll go, but I can't stay in this marriage. I'm sorry." There was no response for a moment, but then he sighed. "I understand, Zuri. I want what's best for you. If this is what you need, I won't stop you." Zuri's hands trembled as she ended the call. The weight that had been pressing on her chest for months suddenly lifted, leaving her feeling both exhausted and relieved. As Zuri walked away from the family home, the world felt different. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt free. The streets of Lagos seemed to stretch out before her, full of possibilities. She didn't need her family's approval. She didn't need the wealth or the house. She needed to reclaim her dreams and her independence. Zuri walked toward the horizon, her heart filled with a sense of peace she hadn't known in months. The journey ahead would be difficult, but she was no longer afraid. She had made the hardest decision of her life, and now she was free to live it. Zuri woke up early the next morning in a small apartment she had rented just outside the city. The sunlight filtered through the window, casting a warm glow on the room. For the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. She stood in front of the mirror, her reflection showing a woman who had finally taken control of her life. The scars of the past were still there, but she knew she could heal. She had taken the first step toward finding herself again, and that was enough. Zuri spent the next few weeks focusing on herself. She applied to architecture firms, worked on her portfolio, and reconnected with old friends. Slowly but surely, she began to rebuild the life she had once dreamed of. Months later, Mama Olumide came to visit Zuri. The air between them was tense, but Zuri could see the love in her mother's eyes. They sat down in the small living room, the silence between them speaking volumes. "I never wanted you to feel like you had no choice," Mama Olumide said quietly. "I thought I was doing what was best for you, but I see now that I was wrong." Zuri reached out and took her mother's hand. "I know you only wanted what was best for me, Mama, but I had to find my own path. I couldn't keep living someone else's life." They sat together in the quiet, the bond between them slowly healing, not because of the marriage, but because of the understanding they had come to. Zuri stood on the rooftop of her apartment building, looking out at the city. The skyline stretched before her, full of promise. She had a long way to go, but she was no longer afraid of the journey ahead. For the first time in a long while, she felt hopeful. The future was hers to shape, and this time, she would choose her own path. Zuri smiled to herself. The life she had fought for was finally within her grasp, and this time, She wouldn't let anyone take it from her.